And here we are at Unit 6, Appalachia in Transition, and we're going to talk about the 1920s and 30s in Appalachia. Some of this stuff we've already talked about. We're just going to go more into depth, and two of those topics are the clash of corporate business and mountain culture, and then the labor uprising and the collapse of coal. But we're also going to add to it the Great Depression and New Deal interventions. So here we go. To really understand the 1920s, we have to understand what came before. And we've talked a lot about that in previous units. For generations, Central and Southern Appalachia relied on subsistence farming to feed their families. While not wealthy in money, families were very self-sufficient. We've talked about that a lot. And again, they had strong communal and kinship networks across all the hollows. Hollers is how I was taught to say it. But this is going to change drastically when Northern and Midwestern capitalists discover the vast wealth of old growth timber and coal beneath the mountains. And those are topics we've talked about too. But we're going to get, like I said, into a little bit more depth in this unit. So let's talk about the environmental and economic alteration that's going to happen in Appalachia. Before coal completely dominated the market, timber extraction is going to completely reshape the landscape. By 1920, corporate logging had stripped millions of acres of old growth forest until about 90% of mature forests were completely cleared. 90%. Now, this is going to do two things. It's going to force young men out of independent farming and into wage labor economy because their family lands were ecologically damaged by erosion, which led to flooding, destroying the land even more, and it cleared the way for massive industrial rail systems to reach into the coal fields. The picture to the right is a chestnut tree. These trees used to make up 25% of hardwood in the forest, and they grew to about 100 feet tall, living for centuries. But today, because of all that timbering, those trees, chestnut trees, hardly exist at all. But I wanted to show you these massive, massive trees that were all cut down. They were all cut down. Now we're going to get into the timber effect a little bit more in depth in this unit. But for now, just know that they took them all down, all the trees. Look at these; they're beautiful. Now, I know we've already talked about this before, the corporate control of miners, but we're going to do a little bit more. So, because mines were in remote areas, we talked about this, operators built self contained company towns. At its peak, companies owned about 75% of all the mining communities. So, they owned people basically. The company owned everything, a total monopoly over housing, even the water you drank, the school your children attended, if there was one, and the preacher who spoke on Sunday was in the pocket of these managers and these owners. So this is going to create an absolute corporate power over human life in those company towns. Now we've talked about the private currency and the financial bondage of these miners living in company towns through scrip. We've talked about that. But miners, I just want to reiterate it so you really, really understand. So miners rarely saw US currency like money. They were paid in company script. So it might be like we talked about before, where the company store just kept like a tally. And so your money was just on paper, but as time progressed, they started, I guess people wanted something in their hand, to just have it on paper wasn't, it just didn't seem like you were getting paid. So they decided to come up with tokens, sometimes a paper slip, but a lot of times it was these tokens that you see here in front of you. And if you tried to cash out this script, notice that they have like an image on it to say what mine it came from. If you tried to cash it in for like, I want money, I want out of here, it's going to be like you're not even going to make 1% of the real value of that piece of script. It's heavily discounted. Because the company store inflated prices too, miners frequently owed more money at the end of the month than they earned. And this was done on purpose. It's a trap designed to keep them from quitting. Where are they going to go? They don't have any money in their hand, and script is from one town is useless in another. So I mean, they this is so evil. They literally had these people trapped. And we talked a lot in previous units about unions. and unions coming in to protect people to try and get rights. And so they the owners and the managers are going to create private armies in the coal fields to keep the UMWA, remember that's the United Mine Workers of America, to keep them out. Operators are going to hire private detective agencies. We talked about this, like the Baldwin Felts, and these men acted like heavily armed thugs, and they were actually known as the gunmen of capitalism. So they're going to monitor trains, search incoming mail, ban gatherings, and beat or shoot suspected union organizers. Yes, I did say or shoot. Workers had to sign what's called a yellow dog contract, and this is an agreement to immediate termination if they talk to a union representative. And they get this name because it's implying that only a yellow dog would willingly sign away their constitutional rights. But so that's how it got its name. But there, a lot of people were forced into it, like death. It could be death. So yeah, a lot of people sign that yellow dog contract. Now, remember the Baldwin Felts Agency part in Matewan and the Battle of Blair Mountain. Agency was founded in the early 1890s, sorry, by William Baldwin as the Baldwin Detective Agency. Now, he grew up, this is funny, he grew up reading detective novels and he wanted to be like the characters he wrote about. So he created this whole agency. And I mean, did he mean for them to grow up and or this company to grow and create these bullies, these murderers? I don't know. But the agency is finally going to close in 1937 because of the Great Depression. But by the time they closed, the damage to Appalachia and potential union members, it was already done. I mean, unions are going to pretty much go away, even though this agency is dying out at the same time. It's going to kind of go away. And we'll talk more about that in future parts of this unit. So you were in constant danger from these guards that were legally allowed to gun you down, but underground there was also a lot of danger. And one of the big ones that nobody was talking about back then was black lung disease. So you can see this healthy lung, you can see the simple black lung. Simple black lung, your lungs actually repair themselves pretty easily. But by the time you get to this complicated black lung disease, you're just no, you're probably not going to make it. So mining in the 1920s, everything about it was lethal. There were no federal regulations. Operators, of course, are going to prioritize speed over safety, and thousands of miners are going to die annually from slate falls, from methane explosions, and of course, that long-term exposure to coal dust, which causes black lung. Now, if a miner was killed or maimed, his family receives no compensation and was often even evicted from their company home within days of the death of the man of the house. So these companies do not care about these people. One of the things that owners and managers did in the name of safety, and this is ridiculous, they would give the men a caged bird and they carried the bird with them. And if the bird died, that meant get out. There's something lethal. You're breathing something lethal in here. So that's their safety gear right there. That little bird. Ridiculous. And I also wanted you to see some of the dangerous ways they got people into the mines and got the coal out of the mines. So the picture you see on the left is actually two pretty young people, and they're lowering them down into the mine. And so that's the way they'll have to come back up too. Can you imagine? Like that's your job, going down into these holes where somebody has to lower you down and bring you back up. And then the picture here on the right is very often this was a woman or a child that would go down in these tunnels, and we talked about this in another unit. They would chain the car to the person, and then that person literally had to crawl out with the weight of that coal bucket and pull that out as well. So I can't even imagine how hard that would be. And then we have a group called the anthracite breakers. Now, these are boys, 8 to 12 usually, and they broke up coal to remove impurities. Anthracite was one of those impurities. Now, anthracite, when you're supposed to make the coal like you break it. So they're anthracite breakers. So you get a big piece of coal, you break it, you remove the impurities, and this anthracite is this powdery stuff that's clumped onto the coal. And so you take your thumbs and you rub it off of the coal, and of course that anthracite dust is going to go into your face and into your nose and your mouth. And these boys did this 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. Some mines employed as many as 20,000 anthracite breakers at any given time. these boys are going to die. They're going to get lung disease, lung cancer, and they're going to die in massive numbers. West Virginia mines were really, really famous when this broke the news that they would allow these little boys to be anthracite breakers, knowing that within 6 months their noses are going to start to bleed, their lungs are going to start to close up, and if they died, they died. A lot of these kids were runaway kids or just had no family, and so they needed a job and they became anthracite breakers. Now, it's finally going to be outlawed in the early 1920s, but for a really long time, that was a way of life for young boys that had nowhere else to go. Because of all this hardship, despite the risk, miners are going to repeatedly try to organize under the UMWA flag. When miners struck for better wages, went on strike, not struck, when they went on strike for better wages, companies like immediately threw them out of their homes. So families are going to move into communities like this, makeshift tent colonies on independent land. They had to endure like super harsh winters and harassment by company guards. These are tents. They can ride by at any time and just shoot into the tents and kill people willy-nilly. And remember, these are families. So throughout the 1920s, courts are going to consistently issue injunctions that heavily favored the coal operators, not the victims of this violence and the victims of this unsafe work environment. They're going to favor the co-operators. It's all about money. It's all about money. And these people don't have any. Now let's take a second and look at what women are doing. We focus so heavily on the men working in the mine and the hardships that they endured, but while men worked underground, women were seriously the backbone of the coal communities. They managed households without indoor plumbing. They stretched this meager script wage, and they often took in single miners as boarders just to make ends meet. And of course, they have to clean up after him too and feed him. During strikes, women were so vital. They organized food distribution. They ran the tent colonies and they faced down company guards on the picket lines. They were the backbone of those families. While the men were underground enduring hardships, these women were making things above ground as good as they could for their families. And it was a struggle. And I wanted you to see what family life was like for a lot of the kids in mining towns. So this is a picture that was taken of a family in Charleston, West Virginia in 1932. So you can see how filthy they are. Everybody stayed filthy in a coal company town. I mean, it was in the air, it was in your water. Of course, it was in your clothes and on your skin. You could not get clean. But I wanted you to also notice the background. So these are Post Toasties cornflake cereal boxes. That was the insulation for their house so that the wind didn't whip through the cracks as much when it was cold outside. Imagine that. That's your wallpaper. Cereal boxes. It's the sad state of affairs. And this is Charleston, West Virginia. Now, we've talked about diversity in the mines before, and to suppress wages and prevent union solidarity, operators deliberately recruited a very diverse workforce. So you have native white mountaineers, you've got African Americans, many were fleeing Jim Crow in the South, and then, of course, you have those European immigrants that we've already talked about. So they lived in segregated neighborhoods in the company town, but underground, they're the same. They face the same dangers and they forge a really unique multi-ethnic labor identity. And I mean, they all stayed poor while the owners and the managers got more wealthy. So it tended to be that in these mines, there were three specific groups they had these stereotypes about them. And so they kind of were overlooked to be textile workers, which was also a big thing during this time period. And they were kind of shoved underground. So I want to talk about them. The Italians, the reason that they were not welcome in the textile businesses is because they were seen as violent. Italian men, all they do is fight. All they do is fight. We can't have fighting around the machines in a textile industry. So put them underground. Put them underground. Let them work hard with a pick and an axe, and they won't be violent. Which, of course, none of that is true. Now, Poles. And I have researched this. I do not know where it came from. Poles back then, and even when I was a kid, had a reputation of not being very smart. They are smart. I mean, Polish people have disappeared from the map 3 times in history that I know of and brought their country back. So, no, they are not a dumb group of people, but they had that stereotype. And so it was believed that Polish people weren't smart enough to work in a textile factory, and so shoved them underground. There's no logic to a pick and an axe. Now, the Slavic people was a third group, and this is such a strange thing. So Slavic people had a favorite food, or addition to their food, I should say, and it was called ramps. If you grew up in West Virginia, you probably know what a ramp is. It's an onion. It is a wonderful tasting onion, but that ramp stays in your blood system for days after you eat ramps. There is actually a law in the law code of West Virginia that says that children that eat ramps cannot come to school. I think it's 2 days. It might be three, but it's actually a law. Of course, nobody looks at it anymore. But when I first moved to West Virginia, that was how they kind of initiated me. The kids got together and they brought my family ramps, and I mean it was wonderful. It was wonderful. My family likes liver and onions. I know that grosses some people out, but we like liver and onions. So my dad made liver and ramps, and it was the best meal I can remember having as a kid. But nobody told us the next day everything about you smelled like that ramp. Your sweat, your breath, you just reeked for days because of these ramps. Well, Slavic people eat them too. So they got this stereotype started that they didn't bathe, that they were filthy people. They weren't. They just like to eat ramps. And so a lot of Slavic people will be shoved underground where they won't offend anybody with their odor. It's like the silliest thing ever, but Italians, Poles, and Slavs. And I wanted to give you an example of what their pay would look like. And so you can see how much they made, and then it takes out their store debt, Social Security. It takes out the rent that they owe, and all this other stuff. If you went to the hospital, they take that off. Look here, they have a burial fund. You had to pay to go to a bathhouse if you did not have running water in your house. So here's all the things that they could be charged for in the end. And usually, like I said, by the time that they're completely done with you, you really don't have enough money to go buy all the goods and stuff that you need to buy from the company store. But this is a good example of what it would have looked like. And notice that this is in New River, Pocahontas County. So let's look at how many mines there were in Appalachia. Now, this is just a little glimpse, mostly of West Virginia. This is how many coal mines. So, urban America, they're going to experience this economic high of the roaring 20s. But Appalachia, they fell into a severe depression by 1925, a premature economic collapse. The market was flooded with way too many coal mines. Look at this. And a new energy source like oil began eating away at the demand for coal, too. Mines are going to close by the dozens, and the region was already deeply impoverished before the rest of the nation even realized there was a crisis on its way. Destitution hits those mountains years before the 1929 crash. And then the bottom is going to completely fall out from underneath everybody. When Wall Street crashed in 1929, it took an already desperate Appalachian economy and pushed it to absolute catastrophe. Mining operations ceased entirely in many areas, and because the towns were privately owned when a company went bankrupt, it shut off the electricity, the water, closed medical clinics, and left entire communities completely stranded. Starvation becomes a real thing. Malnutrition, at the least, is going to grip all the hollows. The local county relief and charity funds, they dried up. I mean, there was not enough funds to help everybody that needs it. But I want to give you an example of the strength of these people in Appalachia. So the picture that you see all the way to the right, the woman standing on her front porch with a little boy. This is the story of that picture. This little boy arrives just before sunset and walks up to this porch. The woman does not know him. He just walked up. He saw that his coat was torn, his shoes were completely covered in mud, and he asked farmer and his wife if he could sleep somewhere warm. When the farmer looked at his wife, they had barely enough food for their own family, but she brought out a blanket. Blanket. Sleep on the porch, she said. Stranger thanked her, and in the morning he was gone. But on that porch sat the blanket, folded very, very neatly. So years later, This farmer and his wife are telling their son this story. And the son says, Mom, why would you help a stranger when you guys had nothing? And she looked at her son and said, We had nothing. That boy had less. So she gave him a blanket and he wasn't willing to keep it. That's the love and the camaraderie in Appalachia. You can see from these pictures how desperate these people are, but they still want to help each other. That's just, you're not going to find that in very many places in the world. Things are not going to get better in anytime soon. So we're going to talk about the ecological collapse in the hills of Appalachia. This economic crisis that they were already in was much worsened by an environmental one. And I've touched on this before. That heavy logging of the decades before meant there is no longer a root system to hold the soil down in Appalachia. So when severe drought swept the country in 1930 and 31, the soil, most of it just simply died. And then there were severe rains that came late in 1931, and what little topsoil might have survived was washed down into the rivers during flash floods. By 1932, many valleys were completely unfarmable even for subsistence farming, the smallest of subsistence farms, and just when the families needed that food the most. The picture you see here is the Monongahela River during the 1930 drought, just so you see how bad that drought was. So this is in Morgantown, again, 1930, and this is a river. It was so dry, people could almost walk across that river. And the tally is that it was losing 1/10 of a foot every 24 hours, losing almost 2 feet before any rains came. So you can see how awful it was, that drought. And then imagine on top of that, this heavy rain, what that would do to people. Now in Morgantown back then, the sewer system was atrocious too. And so with the water levels going down, the sewer system is highly affected by it. And it started to kind of, there wasn't water to wash it away, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So supposedly back then, all of Morgantown smelled like a sewer on top of not having clean water. I mean, it was pretty bad for everybody. And then the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt is going to bring hope to the region. The real turning point came in 1933 with FDR's New Deal. Lots and lots of different things to help American people, and it's going to specifically help the people in Appalachia. So Congress is going to pass the NIRA, and Section 7A of the NIRA is the National Industrial Recovery Act. This is what's going to change Appalachian history forever. It federally protected workers' rights to organize without fear of corporate retaliation. So organizers are going to flood the mountains with the message, the president wants you to join the union. President. Within months, thousands of miners rejoined the MWA. Now remember, not all the mines had completely closed. There was still a demand for coal even in the hardest of times, but there just wasn't enough jobs to keep everyone employed in a coal mine. So here you might hear this name in doing some research for a project that you're going to do for this unit. John Lewis, he's the one with the big hair next to FDR. He is going to be the president of the UMWA during this period, and he is going to have a lot of talks with Roosevelt to make sure that he understands the plight of the people in Appalachia. He was a good guy. Now, Roosevelt and especially Eleanor traveled through these areas of Appalachia just to see how bad it was, to see what they needed first. And one of the things that he decided was important to heal was the landscape. So he created something called the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC is what it's better known as. And he hired unemployed young men by the thousands, black and white. Now, they were segregated in sleeping quarters, but not during the day. They were brought out and they built these beautiful camps. Now, in Appalachia, CCC camps focused heavily on reforesting those hillsides that were devastated by that timber boom that we talked about. They planted millions of trees. They stabilized the riverbanks. They built foundations of park systems that we still use today. And this includes much of the Appalachian Trail. If any of you have ever walked on it, it is beautiful. It's still well taken care of. And you can see the map of the Appalachian Trail, how big it is, how long it is. And not every bit of it, but a ton of it, if not most of it, was built by men who were part of that CCC. The pictures you see here of the other place, this is actually a park. It's called Hawk's Nest. It's not too far from Charleston, West Virginia, if you know where that is. It is absolutely beautiful. It's one of my favorite parks built by the CCC. A lot of men actually died building this park. It was, you blew up rocks, and you can see the little staircase that goes through the rocks here. But it is absolutely breathtaking. And here at the bottom, you see that's my husband, Mr. Daredevil, standing on the wall to get the picture that you see on the bottom right here. That's his picture of the river. So it is definitely a park worth visiting. Don't get up on the wall like my husband. That scared the crud out of me. So you had the CCC taking care of the trees that were lost, the erosion that occurred, and it gave men jobs. Very important. Another deal that came out of the New Deal is the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, and they're going to build the modern infrastructure of Appalachia and well, different parts of America, not just Appalachia. But the WPA is going to specifically pour millions of federal dollars into Appalachia on purpose. Now, before the 1930s, most mountain communities, well, not most, but many, many, many were completely isolated by geography. We've talked about that. The WPA is going to build paved roads, and stone bridges that will actually last. In many places, they broke the physical isolation of the most remote haulers, these people that had never been able to go anywhere but where they were, and they were this isolated community no more. They also built modern schoolhouses for the kids, and they created what I am so thankful for, this Federal Writers Project. It hired locals to record oral histories, and they captured mountain folklore before it disappeared. Now, this part of it, the Federal Writers Bureau, this is a plan of FDR to keep the stories and the history of our communities alive. And these writers did such a good job. These interviews with people who came out of those isolated communities that nobody really understood their lives. But I'll tell you another group, and this is going off to another story here, but I want you to understand how important this Federal Writers Project was. FDR also had them go and interview people who had actually been enslaved. They were slaves. Now, by this time period, they're dying off. And this was the last chance, and FDR knew it, to get the stories, their firsthand account of what it was like to be a slave in America. And my dissertation is I use so much of those stories straight from the mouths of those who were enslaved. I can't tell you. I would not have been able to do my dissertation without those firsthand accounts. So a very, very important part of the WPA is that writers project. So one of the other neat things that they did is they hired artists. Now the WPA is meant to kind of keep people where they are. You may not know this, but during the Great Depression, people are literally traveling back and forth from coast to coast, most often on train lines, and they're filtering into these towns, and sometimes it's not a good thing. It's overcrowding. He wants people to stay home. He wants people to stop traveling the country and causing problems. He wants them to stay where they are. Well, there are groups of people that aren't laborers. They're not going to join the CCC. They're artists and they're teachers, and he finds jobs for all these people. Teachers are go teach English to these immigrants. We have a whole bunch of immigrants in our country, and one of the cool things that they did for artists is they paid them to paint murals of what life was like for them in their town. And most of the murals are going to end up in post offices across their country. And there's some that you can still see. The one that you see right here at the top is in Boone, North Carolina, like it says. And then the one that you see on the bottom is actually on the outside of a post office, and that's at Matewan. So it's supposed to tell the stories of their community through art. Such a neat idea. If you really, the only thing you know is art, what kind of job would you get during the Great Depression? Well, here you go. FDR figured it out for you. And once things start changing for people in Appalachia, it's just one change after another in a good way. So in 1933, the federal government, under the New Deal, created the TVA, that's the Tennessee Valley Authority. And they built these massive dams to control flooding. I mean, that has always been a problem in the Tennessee Valley area. So on top of it controlling the flooding, it also generated cheap electricity for this, at least the southern slice of Appalachia. And then on top of that, they also created the REA, which is the Rural Electrification Act. And you're going to suddenly see power lines creeping into those deep hollers in the mountains. And of course, that's going to forever change their lives. Imagine having refrigeration for the very first time. Imagine that. So the light bulb that you see here, that's how most families got light for the first time. You got one bulb, usually in the kitchen, because that's where family life happened. And this is called the pendant light. And it is one single bulb, and it hangs from this very thick cord, long cord from your ceiling. And that's how it started. So everybody got that one light, and of course, it will expand from there. But in these homes, also, they also got for the very first time, because now they have electricity, is a radio, and it's gonna, for the first time, connect Appalachian people to the rest of the world. So not everybody can afford a radio at the time. It's still considered very much a luxury, even with the New Deal things, making people money and stuff like that for the first time in a long time. But mountain people, now remember how they are. If your family was lucky enough to own a radio, you invited your neighbors over to listen to it too. And we get this wave of these radio shows that are like a soap opera almost. It's an ongoing story. And I want to give you some examples. Now, think about the time period. This is the Great Depression, and people are depressed. They are depressed. And so the shows that they play on the radio is supposed to uplift you and carry you away into this, you know, this pretend life, at least for a little while. So let me give you an example of the names of some of these shows, and you'll kind of get it. The Adventures of Ellery Queen, it was a mystery thing. The Adventures of Sam Spade, also a mystery thing. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, this is a family. And The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So it's all adventure, adventure, adventure. And they had sounds in the background. They left each episode had a cliffhanger to make you want to come back and hear what happens next, and it became an escape for people. It really did. So we're seeing all these great things happen in Appalachia, but we have to talk about this. As much as I don't want to, it's reality. And there's always a cost to progress, what we call progress. Now, New Deal progress is going to come with a lot of human cost to create parks like this park you see in front of you, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and various TVA reservoirs. The federal government is going to use something called eminent domain, and thousands of mountain families are legally forced off their lands, the lands that their ancestors may have settled centuries ago. And it's going to create a very complex legacy of resentment towards federal overreach, even alongside that appreciation that they have for the environmental preservation. Some people are going to have to leave to give us these beautiful parks like the one that you see here. And so another unit comes to an end. I just want to top it off with kind of seeing where we went. So the 1920s and 30s, of course, are going to completely reshape Appalachia. It's going to go from this collection of these very isolated agrarian communities to see capitalism right up close. And bad things are going to happen with labor rights and the cost of human lives in these mining companies. And then FDR is going to come in with this New Deal, and he's going to break the domination of the coal barons, and he's going to revamp the land that was destroyed. And so you see this group of people. It's like this pendulum back and forth between bad and good and bad and good, economic depression, transformations of the New Deal. You know what I mean? Like back and forth. But no matter what, and this is what just endears these people to me beyond anything that I can say to you. But all of this, hardships and good times, Appalachian people, they have this fierce resilience, and no matter what, they're going to preserve their distinct cultural identity. So I hope that you've got that out of this unit. This is one of my favorite units, just to see that transformation of this region. So see you in the next one.